Code mode for MCP is all the rage right now, and in this episode, you'll see step by step how you can get a Code Mode MCP server for your API. So Stainless allows you to take your OpenAPI spec and generate an MCP server that runs with Code Mode. Let's walk through this process end to end. The first thing you'll do is head over to app.stainless.com and sign up for an account. And once you are logged in, you'll be able to create a new project. A project is a mapping between your API and a set of SDKs in different languages, or a docs platform, and or a MCP server. So in this case, we're going to use a fun little API that I've built for TED Lasso data. So let's just call this one TED Demo. We're going to pick TypeScript because the TypeScript SDK is one of the requirements for using the Code Mode MCP server. Now we need to upload an OpenAPI spec. We can either give it a public URL, or we can upload one, or we can even use an example. But I'm going to upload one that I've got here already. So I've got this OpenAPI spec that represents my TED Lasso API, and Stainless is going to generate a new project for us. The way that Stainless works is you give us an OpenAPI spec, and then we can configure SDKs, MCP servers, and docs. Now, part of this onboarding is we have an AI agent that's going to go and generate a Stainless config for us, and that allows us to really customize and tune the shape of the SDK so that it is really like ergonomic. So the output of creating the project was a TypeScript SDK. We can already go play around with this. That was all we needed to do, was give it this OpenAPI spec where we could actually like open this up and experiment with our TypeScript SDK. But we're not talking about the TypeScript SDK today. We're going to talk about the MCP server. The next step is to generate an MCP server for our TypeScript SDK. So we're going to click this plus sign here and go down to MCP server. We're going to say, yeah, let's add this as one of our targets, but you'll notice that there's lots of other languages that you could also add, and these could become SDKs that are available for developers to integrate with your API. Makes it really, really simple to add. So we can just say like, yeah, we want to add the MCP server. And now our Stainless config has some changes, right? So we added the MCP server directly here. So we can see that there's a diff, and we're able to save our changes to our Stainless config. And this will make it so that the next time our SDK builds, it will have this MCP server generated as part of that SDK. While that's running, let's do a quick tour. This is the Stainless Studio. You'll notice that we have some diagnostics. We have a very strict set of tons and tons of lints and validations and diagnostics that we run, both at write time and at build time. So right now we're showing that there are 9 different things that we could address. One of them is that pagination is not configured. So one of the things that's missing from the OpenAPI spec definition is how to define pagination. A really handy tool that is built into the Stainless Studio now is this like auto guess. So we can just say, yeah, resolve this diagnostic and implement a pagination pattern in our Stainless config just using AI. So we can click on that button, and now the diagnostics have been resolved. Pagination was dropped in for us. This is using limit offset pagination. So again, I'm going to save and build so that auto-pagination will be added directly into our TypeScript SDK. If we go take a look at the repo now, you'll see there's a new packages directory with our MCP server right here. This also gives us some instructions for how we might experiment with this. So let's go ahead and clone this and play around. Okay, so we've got our TypeScript SDK downloaded, and now we can bootstrap and build. I've already got the homebrew dependencies installed, so we're going to skip that step. It's going to npm install, and then we're also going to run scripts build. That's going to build both our TypeScript SDK and our MCP server. All right, the next step is to actually run this. So if we wanted to experiment with just running it at the command line, we could try this. All right, the MCP server is now up and running with 2 tools, execute and search docs. So this is kind of the typical output that you would see if you ran an MCP server directly from the command line, but it's really not that interesting until we connect it to, an MCP host like Claude Code or Cursor. So let's take that next step. In the README for the MCP server, we'll see this JSON block that we can grab. Let's actually just put that into a .mcp.json file locally here. This will let us use this MCP server inside of Claude. We actually need to tell it that we want the path to this MCP server to be the absolute path to the current directory. And for now, I have this running locally. I'm just going to give it this basic API key. Now, there's one other thing that we need to do when we're running this in this test mode that's not deployed. We also need to tell it how to authenticate to Stainless in order to pass the code that needs to be executed in code mode. So what we want to do is pass in a Stainless API key. We're going to get this from our org settings. So we're going to head back over to the Stainless dashboard here, go to our organization, and we want to go to settings. Under our API keys, we can create a brand new API key. We're going to say this is a TED demo, and I'll roll this right after we finish. Okay, so we're going to set our Stainless API key and our API key for our actual API. All right, let's fire up Claude and see what we can do. So we jump into Claude Code here and we say MCP. You'll see a whole list of MCP servers that are available for my org, but also at the top here, we see TED Demo API is connected. And when we jump in, we can tell that this is running the local instance of the MCP server and that it has two tools. And if we look at the tools, we have execute and we have search docs. So that is awesome. Let's give this thing something to chew on. So let's give me a list of all the characters and their salaries. And if you have it available in the API, also give me the height. So let's just make sure that we have all these details available and yeah, use the MCP server to tell me things about the Ted Lasso characters. First thing it wants to do is search docs. So this is going to be one of the tools we can run. And this is going to say, list all the fields, salary and height. Do we want to allow this to happen? Yes, we do. The search docs tool is really powerful, especially because it's paired directly with the TypeScript SDK. So the docs that it's getting back are directly tied to the types that are available in the TypeScript SDK that will then be used when executing the code. So when we look at the code that's going to be executed here, we can see that it is using the auto-pagination feature of the underlying SDK to go through and create this list of characters that we're going to get back. Yeah, 11,000 tokens in the response. Maybe it's going to say, okay, it got the data, but maybe it's too long. So now it's going to attempt to improve that. Yes, we want to allow it to do this next execution. So now you'll see that instead of just pushing the entire character onto the collection that's being returned, it's just giving us the name, role, salary, and their height. So let's take a look at that. If we open this up, you'll see actually like a pretty nice output here that has the character name, that they are a player, their salary, and their height, which is pretty nice. And oh, look at that. Claude even organized it based on the roles and their name and salary and height. That's pretty cool. But really, that was just one endpoint. That was the list endpoint. So let's give it a little bit more of a challenging task here. So let's see. Give me a list of the teams for each of the players and their rivals, and then also tell me about some of the matches that have been played in the past. So Code Mode MCP performs especially well with these sort of like needle in a haystack type requests where you need to combine multiple different API calls. This is why it works so well with the Stripe API, is because if you have hundreds and hundreds of customers, it can loop over those in code and then give you back a very tiny result so it doesn't clutter your context. I like to call it bespoke, sort of just-in-time business logic. So every time the code mode is implementing a little bit of custom code that is just for your use case to answer just your question. And in this case, it's going out and it's understanding, how do I get team members? How do I list matches? And then how do I find out who their rivals are? So now it's going to sort of combine all these details and give us something in the result. So this is part of what makes code mode so much more powerful than having one endpoint per tool, and also so much more powerful than even having dynamic tools, because with dynamic tools, you would have had to make, maybe hundreds of tool calls in order to get the same data back. Whereas we're able to use the API to make several different API calls, sometimes in one execute trip, and combine all that data together to give us back a really nice, concise answer that doesn't really clutter our context. So here we've got a bunch of information. Let's see. So we've got our team, the nickname, the stadium, and their rivals, which is fantastic. We've actually got like all 12 teams. We've got their rivals, we have their stadiums. I also asked for some match details, and here we have match 1, AFC Richmond versus Manchester City. Okay, fantastic. We actually got some output about the matches. Oh my gosh, we even have revenue. This is amazing. Okay, fun API. I love Ted Lasso. Code Mode MCP is very powerful, so we have it running locally. Let's take it the next step. You can click this button to enable hosting this MCP server as a remote MCP server. And this will set it up for you where you can just get a remote endpoint directly. All right, it looks like our Stainless hosted version of our MCP server is ready. So we can copy a link to the MCP URL here. Let's add the remote MCP server. We're gonna give it a name. We're also gonna give it a header, tell it that we want to use the HTTP transport, and we're going to paste in that URL that we just got for the hosted MCP server. All right, we can fire up Claude with /MCP. This is just a shortcut, and now we can see that we are connected. If we jump in, now we can tell that this is actually using the remote hosted version of the MCP server. And if we look at the tools, again, we have execute and search docs, and we can just test this out again by saying, give me a list of the characters and their salaries from the Ted Lasso API using the Ted Lasso MCP server. Again, it wants to search docs. Now it wants to execute. And we got back a list of characters and their salaries. This is a remote MCP server that is hosted by Stainless. So you can really quickly take your OpenAPI spec, generate a TypeScript SDK, generate a Code Mode MCP server, host it with Stainless, start passing out this URL that now will allow end users with their API keys to have a Code Mode MCP server for your API. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, head over to the documentation or reach out. We're available on X, and you can head over to stainless.com for more information. We'll see you next time.